Here's the tea. So I've been getting a lot of comments on my last video on how to implement some form training into all of those exercises that I listed on my last video. So today we're going to be going over the basics of how to implement some form tips and tricks into any type of glute exercise or booty workout that you're doing. So when you're looking at the lower extremity, especially for glute exercises, the three components that you need to look at for body movements is your spine, pelvis, and at the leg. Let's start by breaking down the spine compartment. When we're looking at the glutes, we want to see specifically if our spine should be in flexion, which means rounding of our shoulders over the back, extension, which means bending backwards, or at neutral, which means at midline. So for all of our glute exercises, we're going to want to keep our spine in neutral, and this is because when we're generating force from our hips, we're actually doing the action of hip extension, which also will kick on your back muscles to do back extension, but we're not wanting this compensation because we're wanting to generate all of the force from our glutes, not from our back. All right, next up we have our pelvis. So for the pelvis compartment, we have three different types that we can choose from. We can do anterior rotation, which means that your hips are kind of extending into a rotated forward tilt, posterior rotation, which pulls your glutes underneath you into a backwards tilt, or 0 degrees of rotation, which means they're kind of at neutral. This compartment's a pretty tricky question because we're actually at neutral when we're sitting in 15 degrees of anterior rotated pelvic tilt. This is because it's compensating for our natural curve of our lumbar extension. But we have to keep this in mind because we don't want to go over this anterior pelvic tilt, but we also don't want to pull underneath because then that kind of inhibits our muscles' line of pull so that it can't contract and produce the max force to get us that dream booty. Next, we have our leg compartment. This compartment honestly depends on your own genetics and how your body is built because everyone's body is not built the same. There's really not a right or wrong answer. However, it's really important to note that too much of any type of rotation is not good for body mechanics. Just like anything in life, too much of anything is not a good thing. So now that we've cleared all the compartments above and below our glutes, let's add in some exercises from our last video to give you a better visual demonstration. I took the top 3 exercises from our last video to kind of show you what I mean. So every single one of these exercises is broken down into the 3 compartments we just talked about, so spine, pelvis, and leg. However, the highlighted portion of each is showing the normal compensation that people will tend to use when they're doing these exercises. And this is where we'll really need to zone in on those tips and tricks of form improvement. For hip thrusts, we really will tend to see a lot of people use their spine to lift up the heavy weight versus powering their glutes to make that transition up into full extension. For clamshells, it's really common for people to use their pelvis to move outward versus firing their glutes to move their leg into external rotation. And for our fire hydrant, it's actually really cool because we can manipulate the leg compartment in the sense that if you're wanting that glute max to work, you can do slight external rotation in order to lift the leg. However, since we're using our glute min to contract, we're going to do a slight internal rotation to bias that muscle. Let me know if you have any concerns or questions in the comments, but I hope this helped.